All right, so today we're going to be checking out some tips from Darren at the odysseycamper.com travel blog. Specifically, his advice on staying warm in a van during the winter.
Yeah, sounds like a pretty crucial topic if you're going to be living the van life year-round.
For sure, especially if you're somewhere that gets seriously cold. It's one thing to have a cozy van in the summer, but winter's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, definitely. You got to be prepared for those freezing nights and figuring out how to stay warm without draining your battery.
Exactly. So let's jump into what Darren has to say. One thing that really caught my eye was his whole approach to creating a base layer for warmth.
Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting concept he's got there.
He actually uses a Coleman cot as the foundation for his bed. Not something I would have thought of right away.
It's kind of like thinking about a house, right? You need a solid foundation to prevent heat loss, and that's what he's doing with the cot.
So it's not just about the cot itself, but the fact that it elevates him off the cold van floor.
Right. It creates that air pocket underneath, which adds another layer of insulation.
Clever. And then on top of that, he adds even more insulation with a layer of Reflectix under his mattress. I've seen Reflectix used for all sorts of things, but never really understood how it works.
It's basically like a supercharged version of those emergency blankets you see in first aid kits. It has this metallic coating that reflects radiant heat back at you.
So instead of your body heat escaping into the cold van, it bounces right back.
Exactly. It's all about trapping that heat and keeping it where you want it.
But wouldn't a thicker mattress achieve the same thing? Why the combo of a cot and the Reflectix?
Good question. I think Darren's going for maximum efficiency in terms of both space and materials. A super thick mattress takes up a lot of room, which is precious in a van.
Makes sense. So the cot and Reflectix combo gives him good insulation without sacrificing living space.
Plus, Reflectix has other uses like blocking out the sun in the summer, so it's a versatile tool to have around.
Okay, so we've got the foundation covered. What about the actual sleeping situation?
Well, Darren talks about using sleeping bags and blankets. And he's got a pretty funny take on those temperature ratings they put on sleeping bags.
Yeah, he's right to be skeptical about those. They're more about survival than actual comfort in my experience.
Exactly. He actually recommends layering a 3-season bag with a summer weight one for colder temperatures.
Interesting. So you're basically creating your own custom warmth level.
Right. And he even talks about how blankets offer more flexibility when you've got 2 people sharing a bed.
Good point. 2 separate sleeping bags wouldn't exactly be the most romantic setup.
Exactly. So blankets allow for a bit more shared warmth, shall we say.
Before we move on, there's one detail I found amusing. Darren uses a helmet liner, or a scully as he calls it, to keep his head warm at night.
Haha. It might seem a little overkill, but you actually lose a lot of heat through your head.
Really? I always thought that was an old wives' tale.
Nope, it's true. Keeping your head covered, even while sleeping, can make a big difference in overall warmth. It's a basic survival technique.
Well, I'll try that out then. All right, so we've talked about passive warmth. Now let's get into the active warmth strategies. This is where things get really interesting. Darren's secret weapon is an electric blanket.
Ah, yes. The electric blanket, a classic for a reason.
But I'm curious how that works in a van setup.
He uses a sunbeam electric fleece throw, and he says it can keep him warm down to 22 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow, that's impressive. But doesn't running an electric blanket all night drain your battery?
You'd think so, but he actually measured the power consumption, and it wasn't as bad as you might think. It hovered around 50-60 watts no matter what heat setting he used.
That's less than I expected, but still, you need a decent power source to keep that going all night. And this is where I got a bit confused. He mentions a warning about something called modified sine wave inverters. Can you explain what that's all about?
Sure, so most cheaper inverters produce a modified sine wave, which is basically a choppy version of the smooth AC power you get from a wall outlet.
Okay, so the electric blanket needs that smooth power to function properly.
Exactly. A modified sine wave can actually damage the blanket's controller.
Interesting. So it's not just about having an inverter. It's about having the right kind of inverter.
Right. Darren recommends a true sine wave inverter because they produce that smooth, clean power.
He even recommends a specific one, a Novapol 1500-watt true sine wave inverter. Is that overkill for just an electric blanket?
Not necessarily. That size inverter can power other appliances too, like a laptop, a small fridge, maybe even a coffee maker. It gives you more flexibility and room to grow your van's electrical system if you need to.
So the electric blanket strategy seems like a game changer for staying warm in a van. But what if you're in a larger van and you need to heat the whole space? An electric blanket won't cut it then.
For those situations, Darren suggests a couple of alternative heat sources. For temperatures above 40 degrees, a small electric heater can work well.
Okay, that makes sense for those shoulder seasons when it's not freezing but still a bit chilly. But what about for those truly frigid nights?
For those nights, he recommends the Mr. Heater Buddy propane heater. It's a popular choice among van lifers and campers because it's portable and it pumps out a lot of heat.
I've heard of those, but aren't there safety concerns with using a propane heater inside a van?
Definitely, you need to be careful. Propane heaters consume oxygen and produce moisture as a byproduct, so proper ventilation is absolutely essential to prevent carbon monoxide buildup and condensation.
Darren emphasizes cracking a window when using a propane heater. Seems like a simple but crucial safety measure.
Absolutely. You should also have a carbon monoxide detector in any enclosed space where you're burning fuel. Safety always comes first.
So it seems like Darren's advocating for a layered approach to warmth. Passive and active methods combined.
Exactly. And what's really valuable is that he's not just theorizing, he's sharing what's worked for him in the real world.
And that firsthand experience makes all the difference. I'm already thinking about how I can adapt some of these techniques for my own winter adventures.
Me too. What stood out to you as the most interesting tip?
I'm really intrigued by the electric blanket strategy, but I'm also fascinated by his use of the Coleman cot as a base layer. It's so simple, yet effective. What about you?
I'm drawn to how he connects van insulation with the basic principles of heat transfer. It's a reminder that we can learn a lot from how traditional structures are built and apply those lessons to smaller, more mobile spaces.
That's a great point. All right, I'm ready to hear more. What other insights does Darren have for us in this blog post?
Well, next up, let's dive into his discussion of power management and batteries, which is crucial for running any of these electrical appliances in a van.
Sounds good. This is shaping up to be a fascinating look at winter van life.
All right, so we're back and we've been talking all about how Darren stays warm in his van during the winter.
Yeah, one thing that keeps coming up is the importance of being mindful of power consumption, especially when you're relying on things like electric blankets and heaters.
Exactly, you don't want to end up with a dead battery in the middle of a blizzard.
So let's dig into how Darren manages his electrical system. You mentioned he uses a kilowatt meter to measure the power draw of his electric blanket. What exactly does that tool tell you?
It's like an energy detective for your van.
Hmm.
You plug any device into it, and it tells you exactly how much electricity it's using.
Oh, cool. So you can see how much power your appliances are actually sucking up.
Yeah, you get the wattage, the voltage, even how much it's costing you to run that appliance.
So it's not just about knowing how many watts something uses, but understanding the real-world impact on your battery.
Precisely, it helps you plan your energy budget and figure how long you can run things before you need to recharge.
That's crucial when you're off-grid. Maybe this is a good time to break down the basics of a van's electrical system. For those of us who aren't electricians, what are the key components we should know about?
Sure, so the heart of it is the house battery, which is separate from your van's starter battery. This house battery powers all your lights appliances, and in Darren's case, his electric blanket.
Got it. And then the inverter is what transforms that battery power into something usable for our everyday devices.
Exactly. It converts the DC power from the battery to AC power, which is what most household appliances run on.
And as we talked about before, it's important to have a true sine wave inverter for sensitive electronics like that electric blanket.
Yeah.
So how do you keep that house battery charged? Solar panels seem popular, but I didn't see Darren mention those in his blog post.
You're right, he might have a different setup or rely on shore power when he's at campgrounds. There are also portable generators, but those can be noisy and you have to deal with fuel.
Right. So even without solar, there are ways to conserve battery power.
Absolutely. Switching to LED lights, being mindful of how long you run appliances, even just turning things off completely when you're not using them, all those little things add up.
It's all about energy efficiency.
Especially in winter, cold temperatures can actually impact battery performance.
Now that you mention it, I've heard that cold can drain batteries faster. Is that true?
It's not a myth. Cold reduces a battery's capacity. It's like trying to get the same amount of juice from a frozen orange compared to one at room temperature.
Ah, I get it. So you might think you have a full charge, but the cold sneaks in and saps some of that power away.
Exactly. That's why it's important to avoid deep discharges in cold weather. It can damage your batteries.
So even though Darren's focus is on staying warm, he's also touching on this bigger idea of sustainable living, right?
Absolutely. It's all connected. Being mindful of your energy use isn't just good for the environment. It saves you money and gives you more independence.
Okay, so we've covered passive warmth, active warmth, and power management.
Yeah.
What else does Darren talk about?
Well, he gets into the specifics of his van setup, including how he's insulated it and his bed configuration. He even provides links to the products he uses and recommends.
That's awesome. It's so helpful when people share those kinds of details.
It really embodies that DIY spirit. He's not just showing off his finished van, he's inviting others to learn from his process.
I love that kind of transparency. It makes van life feel more accessible.
Exactly. It's not about copying his build exactly, but taking inspiration and adapting those ideas to your own needs.
Well said. All right, so I'm ready to hear more about Darren's specific setup. What kind of van does he have, and how has he customized it for winter living?
Let's take a look.
So we've talked about all these different strategies, but I'm really curious to see how they all come together in Darren's actual van.
Me too. And luckily, he's got plenty of pictures and videos on his website so we can get a good visual.
His van is a Honda Odyssey, right?
Yep, a minivan turned winter-ready home on wheels.
I'm picturing a Coleman cot crammed in there somehow.
Well, remember, he folds it up during the day to create more living space and then sets it up as his bed at night.
Ah, so it's like a transformer cot/couch.
Exactly. Multifunctionality is key in a van, especially a smaller one like the Odyssey.
And what about the Reflectix we talked about?
I bet he's using that to insulate the windows. Those are a huge source of heat loss in any vehicle.
Yeah, I've seen people make those custom Reflectix window coverings, almost like insulated blinds.
It's a super effective and affordable way to add insulation without making any permanent changes to the van.
Speaking of changes, I noticed Darren doesn't go into a ton of detail about his actual van build in this particular blog post.
Right, but he does link to other articles and videos where he shares more about the conversion process.
I love that he gives people those resources if they want to dive deeper.
It's all about empowering others to create their own van life setups.
And that's what I appreciate most about Darren's blog.
Hmm.
He's not just showcasing his finished van, but inviting others to learn from his experience.
Exactly. It's that DIY spirit of experimentation and sharing knowledge that makes the van life community so special.
Well, this has been a fascinating look into winter van life and all the creative ways to stay warm and cozy on the road.
I'm already brainstorming how I can apply some of these tips to my own life, even though I don't live in a van full time.
Me too. That Coleman cot idea is really sticking with me, and I think I need to get myself a kilowatt meter.
Yeah. It's amazing how much you can learn from people who are actually out there living these alternative lifestyles.
For sure. So to wrap things up, if you want to see more of Darren's van setup and all the details of his winter warmth strategies, be sure to check out his blog.
You can find it at odysseycamper.com or just search for Odyssey Camper on YouTube.
He's got tons of great information and inspiration for anyone who's curious about van life or just wants to learn some tips for staying warm and comfortable in any space.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of winter van living.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.